would like to welcome all the people that connected with us. I see from all over the world, South America, Europe, United States, I see Canada, really everywhere. We are all willing to hear Professor Zakovitch, but I also would like to present you Pamela Emmerich, Pamela Nadler-Emmerich. She is deeply committed to higher education and to Israel. Pamela is a Rothberg International School alumna of the class of 74-75. She's actively involved with the Hebrew University and received an honorary fellowship in 2012. Pamela serves on the National Board of Governors of the Hebrew University, is the secretary and nominating chairwoman of the National Board of the American Friends of the Hebrew University, and also serves as the Northeast Regional Co-President. In recent years, Pamela continued her pursuit of her advanced degree at the Jewish Theological Seminary. So, Pamela, please, the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Mara, and welcome to everyone who is joining us. It's my great privilege of introducing our speaker today, Yair Zakovitch. Professor Zakovitch is the father Takeji Otsuki, I hope I didn't mispronounce that, Professor Emeritus of Bible at the Hebrew University. And at different points in his illustrious academic career, he served as the university's Dean of Humanities, the head of its Department of Bible, and head of the Institute of Jewish Studies. He has taught at many universities and authored numerous books on the Bible, including, among others, books on Jacob, Jonah, the Song of Songs, miracles, myths, and most pertinent for today's discussion, the Exodus. His scholarship is notable for his innovative literary intra-biblical study of the biblical text. And later on this year, he will receive the Israel Prize in Biblical Studies. So yasher koach on that. On a personal level, I feel very fortunate to have been introduced to Yair 10 years ago when I was visiting the university. As Mara mentioned, I had studied at the Rothberg School, and as a way of giving back to Hebrew U for giving me an amazing year of personal growth and studied, I became involved with the American Friends of Hebrew U. And in our meeting, Yair described the research he was doing for a book about Jacob. And when I told him that I envied him for getting to do such interesting work, he suggested that it was never too late for me to go back to academic studies. And a few years later, with that seed planted in my brain, I enrolled in a single Bible course at JTS in New York. And thanks to him, I'm now a doctoral student in Bible. So a public thank you, Yair, for your inspiration and encouragement. And now I'll turn it over to Yair.
Thank you very much for your introduction. And you did not mention the fact that every morning when I get to my office at the university, I see the sign, because my room was actually donated by Pamela and her family. So actually I think about you every single morning. And now to my lecture. Purim is over, thank God. And Passover is almost around the corner. And that's why I have chosen the topic for tonight: why were the Israelites enslaved in Egypt? You all know that every year on Passover Eve, the Seder, we ask 4 questions, but there is one single question we never ask: why were we enslaved in Egypt? And this is a very important question, because as you know, every catastrophe, every disaster that happens in the Bible, we always have an explanation for it. We always justify God for what happened to us. For instance, is it the flood, or is it the division of the United Kingdom? I'm not referring to Great Britain. I'm talking about Israel and Judah, division between them. Or is it the going into exile from the kingdom of Judah and the kingdom of Israel? We are always to be blamed, and God, we justify him. There is one disaster, one catastrophe, we never ask the question, why did it happen? And that's the enslavement in Egypt. The fact that the Bible does not have an overt answer to this question does not mean that there aren't covert answers. And what we are going to see tonight, or perhaps it's not tonight where you are, Pamela, we are going to look for some covert answers to this question. And let's start immediately with the first one. Text number 1, it's from Genesis 15. Genesis 15, that's a famous story about the covenant between the pieces. Abraham asked God when he and his offspring will have access to the land of Canaan, and that's what he's being told by God. And he said to Abraham, know well that your offspring shall be strangers in the land not theirs, and they shall be enslaved and oppressed for 100 years. But I'll execute judgment on the nation they shall serve, and in the end they shall go free with great wealth. As for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried at a right old age, and they shall return here in the 4th generation. For the iniquity of the Emerites is not yet complete. Why do we have to suffer 400 years in Egypt? Because the Emerites or the Canaanites have not sinned enough yet. So we have to wait until they will sin enough, and then God, has the justification to take the land from them and to give it to you. Well, this is half an answer. I understand why I have to wait, but if I have to wait, I would have preferred to wait in New Zealand because it's COVID-19 free, and not waiting in Egypt and being enslaved for 400 years. So this is only half an answer, but this answer yet is a great hint to the Israelites. The way I take the land from the Amorites, if you don't behave well, one day I may take the land also from your hands. A text that is not on your handout, in the book of Leviticus, in chapter 18, verse 28, God is saying to the Israelites, so let not the land spew you out for defying it, as I spewed out the nation that came before you. So I may do it to you too, so please just behave well when you own the land. But let's move on to the second answer, which is a full answer. In the book of Genesis, chapter 12, verses 10 to 20, we have a great story about Abraham going down to Egypt. You should know that Abraham's life story is actually a series of tests that God is putting him through, starting with go forth from your native land, from Lech Lecha, chapter 12, verse 1, ending with the story of the Akedah, of the binding of Isaac, which also start with and go forth to the land of Moriah, etc., etc. So the first test Abraham is being put through, he passes with flying colors, meaning he leaves the land of his fathers and go to the unknown land of Canaan. But the first difficulty faces there, the famine, he immediately leaves the land and goes down to Egypt, knowing actually that in Egypt he'll face a big problem. The Egyptians may take his wife. And what does Abraham do? He says to his wife, I know what a beautiful woman you are. If the Egyptians see you and think, wow, it's my addition, she is his wife, they will kill me and let you live. Please say that you are my sister, that it may go well with me because of you, and that I may remain alive thanks to you. When Abraham entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw how very beautiful the woman was. Pharaoh's courtiers saw her and praised her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's palace. By the way, she's taken into the palace, the doors are closed behind her, and we know nothing what really happened there between the two of them. And because of her, it went well with Abraham. He acquired sheep, oxen, asses, male and female slaves, she-asses and camels. And then the Lord has to interfere to do something in order to save Sarah. But the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his household with mighty plagues on account of Sarai, the wife of Abraham. Pharaoh sent for Abraham and said, what have you done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? And Abraham has nothing to say, cannot justify himself. You read the story, and we are not quite comfortable reading it, because Abraham does not behave the way we would have expected him to behave. He has no problem, letting Pharaoh take his wife in order, to save his own skin, in order that it will go well with him. And what does it mean, going well with him? He becomes as rich as Rockefeller. So we are not very pleased by him. So the second test he's being put through, is actually does not pass the test very well. And that's actually very nice, because there are no perfect people. Even I am not perfect. And when some of the tests he really passes with flying colors, the other not so well, which shows how human he is. And it's important for us, because I cannot learn something from perfect people. Perfect people are a different species. I can learn from people who are almost perfect, who make mistakes, who even sin a little, pay for their mistakes. And that's how the Bible actually educates us, by showing us these models of these people who are not really perfect. But anyway, this story about Abraham, if you compare it to what happens later to us in Egypt, you see the great resemblance between the story of Abraham and Sarah in Egypt and the story of us being in Egypt, which is text number 3. You should know that the Exodus, or the story of our enslavement and then the Exodus, it's the most important historical event in the Hebrew Bible. There are so many, except for the 4 books of the Torah that are dedicated to this story, from Exodus to Deuteronomy. Except for that, there are so many other references to this story in the Bible. There is no other event that you can compare to the Exodus. So the Exodus, in many ways, is the watershed, because events that will take place after the Exodus, but also events that take place before the Exodus, follow the model of the Exodus. And it's important to see how similar the story of Abraham and Sarah is to the story of the Israelites. Look at these 2 columns that you now see as text number 3. For instance, when Abraham went down to Egypt, later on you'll see that also the brothers of Joseph, the 10 Joseph's brothers, went down to Egypt. The same language. Abraham went there to sojourn there. Also, Jacob's sons went there to sojourn there. Abraham went down to Egypt because there was a famine in the land. The same thing, but the famine in the land was severe. Abraham is afraid that they will kill him and save the life of his wife. The same thing, it happens in Egypt when Pharaoh says, if it is a boy, kill him. If it's a girl, let her live. I'll mention 1 or 2 more examples. For instance, when we hear in our story that the Lord has afflicted Pharaoh, the same language, then Pharaoh sent for Moses, I'll bring more affliction, 1 more affliction upon Pharaoh, etc., etc. The texts are so very similar. Why is it so similar? Why is it so important to describe the event of Abraham and Sarah in Egypt in an Exodus language? And here we have the explanation by Nachmanides. Nachmanides, the great interpreter, commentator of the Bible. And he says, text number 6, he's leaving the land concerning which he had been commanded from the beginning on account of the famine was also a sin he committed. For in famine, God would have redeemed him from death. It was because of his deed that the exile in the land of Egypt at the hand of Pharaoh was decreed for his children. Everybody knew it, but Nachmanides was the only person brave enough to say it. Because Abraham, wow, Abraham, our father, is perfect. Yeah, people were afraid to criticize Abraham, but Nachmanides understood the connection between these two episodes or these two stories and said it overtly. Of course, also the rabbis were aware of this resemblance. Look at text number 4, go back to text number 4. Rabbi Phineas commented in Rabbi Hosea's name, the Holy One, blessed be he, said to our father Abraham, go forth and tread out paths for thy children. For you find that everything written in a connection with Abraham is written in connection with his children. But in the Midrash, they just show you that there is a resemblance, but they don't give you the reason. But already in the book of Genesis, we can find that Abraham was really criticized for what he has done. Look at text number 5. Text number 5, a story of another famine in the land of Canaan. You know that in our part of the world, a famine happens almost every third year. So there was a famine in the land, aside from the previous famine that had occurred in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines in Gerar, and the land had appeared to him and said, do not go down to Egypt. Stay in the land which I point to you. This is a great way to criticize Abraham, telling Isaac, you do not follow your father. Don't make the mistake that he has done. So you see that this whole story about Abraham going down to Egypt, not praying to God to stop the famine, going down to Egypt, letting his wife being taken by Pharaoh, lying that she is his sister, etc., etc. His act actually caused the punishment to his descendants in Egypt. And actually, that's not the end of this answer, because you all know text number 7, the story about the midwives, the brave midwives in Egypt, Shifra and Puah. The king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shifra and the other Puah, saying, when you deliver the Hebrew women, look at the birth stool. If it's a boy, kill him. If it's a girl, let her live. The midwives, fearing God, did not do what the king of Egypt has told them. They let the boys live. So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and said to them, why have you done this thing, letting the boys live? The midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. They are vigorous. Before the midwife can come to them, they already given birth. And God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and increased greatly. And because the midwives feared God, he established households for them. And then Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, every boy that is born you shall throw into the Nile, etc., etc. You have to see the resemblance between this episode and the story of Abraham and Sarah in Egypt. The story of the midwives is actually a mirror reflection of the story of Abraham and Sarah in Egypt. On the one hand, you see the resemblances, but on the other hand, you see the differences. And by the way, whenever you find resemblances between two stories in the Bible, look for the differences. The resemblances are there only in order to attract your attention. The message is always in the difference, in the differences. Now see, let's compare the two stories. Abraham is afraid for his life. The midwives are God-fearing. In both stories, Pharaoh asks for explanation. Abraham does not have an explanation what he has done. The midwives do have. Abraham is lying, and they are lying to Pharaoh, but they are lying in order to save the lives of these little boys. Abraham does not believe that God can help him, and that's why he's going down to Egypt. The midwives have faith in God, etc., etc. So at the end of the story, Pharaoh is dealing well with Abraham, meaning making Abraham rich. It is God who deals well with the midwives. So you see how superior the midwives are to Abraham. That's another way to tell you that Abraham was wrong the way he behaved. Look at the midwives who risked their own lives in order to save the little Hebrew children. By the way, again, the Midrash was aware of the resemblance between the story of Abraham and the story of the midwives. You know, it happens to me every week that I think that I'm the one who has invented the wheel. And then, unfortunately, I found out that already 2,000 years before me, the wheel has been invented. And here what the rabbis say, text number 8, for you find everything written in connection to Abraham is written in connection with the children. Abraham said, I pray thee that thou art my sister, that it may go well with me, Israel, and God dealt well with the midwives. Now, it's very interesting to read what Josephus Flavius, you know that Josephus Flavius in his Jewish Antiquities, he actually paraphrases, retells the biblical stories. But of course, when you paraphrase, you interpret. And let's read what he says about this episode of the midwives. He, the king, commanded that the Egyptian midwives should watch the labors of the Hebrew women. Pay attention. He talks about the Egyptian midwives. When we read the biblical story, the midwives are Hebrew. According to Josephus, the midwives were Egyptians. By the way, the difference is only a difference of the vocalization. It's the same text, but the vocalization he reads is different. Instead of La Me'aldot Ha'ivriot, to the Hebrew midwives, he reads it as Lim Yaldot Ha'ivriot, to the midwives of the Hebrews. And by the way, Josephus is following now here the Septuagint. That's how the Greek translation of the Bible actually reads it. So if the midwives, or at least according to the Septuagint and according to Josephus, if these ladies are Egyptians, then they are much, much more superior to Abraham. Because why should Egyptian women be so interested in saving the lives of the Jewish kids? So if you compare the deeds of the Egyptian midwives to the way Abraham has behaved, of course, they are superior to Abraham, and Abraham, again, should be criticized for the way he behaved. You should understand that this whole technique of mirror reflection stories, that's a great way, in a covert way, to criticize or to judge people, because the Bible does not telling you anything overtly. The Bible does not avert Abraham overtly, but the Bible expects you to be the judge, expects you to decide whether he did behave well or not. How does the Bible do it? Telling you another story, expects you to compare the two, and then you can decide who's behaving better. Is it Abraham or the midwives? And the answer is very clear. Now let's move on to another question, to another answer, and that's in chapter 16. Chapter 16, as you very well know, chapter 16 always follows chapter 15. Chapter 15, that was the chapter about the covenant between the pieces, where we have already heard that the children of Abraham are going to be oppressed in Egypt. Now what happens in chapter 16? Sarai, Abraham's wife, had borne him no children. she had an Egyptian maid servant. Pay attention, she is Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said to Abraham, look, the Lord has kept me from bearing. Consort with my maid. Perhaps I shall have a son through her. And Abraham heeded Sarah's request. Why not? So Sarai, Abraham's wife, took her maid Hagar, the Egyptian. It's the second time we are being told that she is an Egyptian. Those of you who haven't paid attention to the fact the first time it was mentioned, finally pay attention to it because it's very important. So Hagar the Egyptian, after Abraham has dwelt in the land of Canaan 10 years, and gave her to her husband Abraham as concubine. He cohabited with Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw she had conceived, her mistress was lowered in her esteem. And Sarai said to Abraham, the wrong done to me is your fault. Well, you know, some women always blame their husbands, not mine. I myself put my maid in your bosom. Now that she sees that she is pregnant, I am lowered in her esteem. The Lord decide between you and me. Actually, she has no reason to blame Abraham, but of course, that's nature. Then Abraham said to Sarai, your maid is in your hand. Deal with her as you think right. Meaning, don't bother me. Let me watch TV or let me read the paper, etc. You deal with it. He is not ready to take any responsibility or to share any responsibility. Then Sarai treated her harshly. Well, the translators of the Bible always do a very bad job, because the verb that is being used here is exactly the same verb in Hebrew that was used in chapter 15, that the Egyptians oppressed the Israelites. And here it's Sarai oppressed Hagar. And now, since we are talking about the juxtaposition between chapter 15 and chapter 16, we understand why will the Egyptians actually treat harshly or oppress the Israelites? Because Sarai oppressed the Egyptian maidservant in her house. So you have here a measure for measure punishment. And indeed, later when we keep reading this text, you shall, let's go towards the end of the text, three lines from the end of it. You shall call him Ishmael, her son, the son of Hagar, for the Lord has paid heed to your suffering or to your oppression. He shall be a wild ass, etc., etc., etc. And indeed, the way the name of Ishmael is being explained, meaning that because the Lord has heeded, or the Lord has heard your voice, reminds us of what we'll hear later on about the Israelites in Egypt, text number 11. So that they set taskmasters over them to oppress them. Again, the same verb with forced labor. But the more they were oppressed, the more they increased and spread out. And God is in text 12, I have seen the suffering, again, the oppression of my people in Egypt, and heard their outcry because of their taskmasters. So again, you see the resemblance between what happens to Hagar and why her son is being named Ishmael, and what happens later on in Egypt when God will listen, will hear the voice of the suffering of the oppressed Israelites. So because we have oppressed Hagar, we are going to the Egyptian maidservant, the Egyptian slave in Abraham's wife. We will be enslaved in Egypt. Now, you should know that God has a great sense of humor. Look at, let's skip text 14. Let's go immediately to text 15. When Joseph was taken down to Egypt, a certain Egyptian Potiphar, a courtier of Pharaoh, and his chief steward bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him there. Why is it? Why are the Ishmaelites bringing him down to Egypt? The Ishmaelites, the descendants of Ishmael, the descendants of Hagar, they are now the ones that will bring him to Egypt, a perfect revenge for what has been done to the mother of Ishmael in Abraham's house. And now another answer, text number 16. Now Joseph and all his brother and also his father are now in Egypt. You know that because of the famine, they have all came to Egypt. And Joseph is treating them very well. Look at text 16. So Joseph settled his father and his brothers, giving them holdings in the choicest part of the land of Egypt in the region of Ramses, as Pharaoh has commanded. Joseph sustained his father and his brothers and all his father's household with bread down to the little ones, meaning Joseph does not save any effort. He makes sure that his family will have enough to eat through the years or the 7 years of the famine. There is no money anymore. But what happens to the Egyptians at this very time? There is no money anymore. The desperate Egyptians beg, give us bread. Joseph's family, they are eating and dining and whining and enjoying themselves, but the Egyptians are suffering. Give us bread, lest we die before your very eyes. And then we hear again, nothing is left at my Lord's disposal, save our person and our farmland. Let us not perish before your eyes, both we and our land. Take us and our land in exchange for bread, and we with our land will be slaves to Pharaoh. So you see what happens. On the one hand, the Israelites in Egypt are having fun, having good time, having enough to eat, while all the Egyptians are becoming slaves, becoming the slaves of Pharaoh because of Joseph. And then the end of this text, and the people, and then here comes something very strange, the last verse of this text, and the people, he moved them to the cities. Who cares if he moved them to the cities or they live in their villages? But here we have to read the text as it appears in the Samaritan Pentateuch and in the Septuagint. Perhaps you know that the Samaritan Pentateuch, you know our cousins, the Samaritans, they are all good, the good Samaritans. They have their scripture is only the 5 books of Moses. And the text of their Torah, of their 5 books of Moses, is not identical with our text. Sometimes their text goes with the Septuagint. And here we read, and the people, he enslaved them as slaves, not that he moved them to the cities, but he enslaved them as slaves. In Hebrew, it's very similar. העביר אותו לערים, העביד אותו לעבדים. It's a matter of the Dalet and Resh. You know, these 2 letters are very similar to one another. It's a matter of a little chukchik there. That's all the difference between the 2. So I believe that the Septuagint and the Samaritan Pentateuch really reflect the original text, which has been corrupted in the Masoretic, the Hebrew text, and perhaps on purpose. Perhaps somebody did not like the idea of letting us know that Joseph enslaved all the Egyptians. But, and here you see another good reason for making us slaves in Egypt. Joseph, who treated his brothers so well, enslaved the Egyptians. Now, later on, there will come a Pharaoh who will treat his people well, but enslave us. And that's actually the fourth answer we give to our question. And now the last one. And for that, you have, I hope that some of you at least have a degree in mathematics, because now we are going to make some calculations. In Exodus chapter 12, verse 40, text number 19, we read that in text 18, I'm sorry, the length of the time that the Israelites live in Egypt was 430 years. In Genesis 15, we read that they were enslaved for 400, but here in Exodus 12, it's 430. Who cares? But there is a reason for it, 430. If we think or calculate how many years did our patriarchs live in the land of Canaan before they went down to Egypt. Abraham came to the country when he was 75 years old. When he had Isaac, he was 100 years old, so 25 years passed. Isaac was 60 years old when Jacob was born, so already 25 plus 60 is 85. When Jacob faces Pharaoh, he tells him that he's 130 years old. Add 85 to 130, you have 215. What's the ratio between 215 and 430? You know it. So for every year we were in the Holy Land before going down to Egypt, we served 2 years in Egypt. That's a way to tell you that actually our patriarchs were not perfect. Our patriarchs made some mistakes while they lived in the land of Canaan, and that's why for every year in the land of Canaan, they had to serve 2 years in Egypt. And this type of punishment that you have to pay double for your mistakes, for your sins, you see it in Isaiah chapter 40, verse 2. That's the last text on our list. When God is saying, speak tenderly to Jerusalem and declare to her that her term of service is over, that her iniquity is expiated. For she received at the hand of the Lord double for all her sins. So you see that we have 4 answers and a half to our question, why were the Israelites enslaved in Egypt? And this, having so many answers to one single question reminds you of the way the Midrash is working. In the Midrash, when you're in the Midrash and you have a problem, you don't understand the word, you don't understand an event, the rabbis always come, this is the explanation, and another one, and another one, and davar acher, and another one. They always come with multiple answers to one question. And that's also how the Bible works. Actually, what happens in Midrash is exactly what happened in the Bible. The Midrash is just, the Midrash just continues the way the Bible works. Actually, there is a Midrash within the Bible. The Midrash already started within the Bible and is continued by all the generations that follow. Actually, Midrash is the Jewish gene. That's what we always do. Every generation adds to the explanations of the previous generations. And that's what the Jewish culture is all about, starting with the Bible, going on to literature written in the Second Temple period, going on to the rabbinic literature until our modern literature. Okay, I talked too much, so it's time to stop. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you to you. Thank you a lot for your very, very interesting lecture. Now we'll stop to share and we'll see if there are, this is the time for the questions. And I see we have already 2 hands raised, so let's open the microphones. Here, Jamie Broad, you can open your microphone and ask your question. Jamie? So, okay. We can see if Joseph Oscar. Joseph, you can open your microphone. Here you are.
Do you hear me? את שומעת אותי?
כן.
Okay. I would like to ask Professor Zakovitch, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're
Well,
very
first of all, that is a very interesting explanation between the Reish and the Daled, because if we consider our prayer, Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu, Eloheinu Melech Haolam, Eloheinu Ha'echad, and we put the accent of the Echad, because the Dalet, between the Dalet and the Reish, there is a very small difference. If we don't pay attention, we say Eloheinu Ha'acher, which is another God, which brings us to Avodah Zarah. That is a possibility to explain. But there is another question I would like to ask you. And that is, from the historical point of view, the story of the Hyksos. Hyksos who came to Egypt and governed Egypt for about 200 years, throwing into the upper side of Egypt the old Egyptians. During those 200 years, probably there was a pharaoh who relied not on the Egyptians because he did not trust them. Then he used the Israelites to govern the land, and this is how Joseph became viceroy, because also immediately after the book of Genesis is ending, we hear, and there came a king who did not know Joseph. ויבוא מלך חדש שלא ידע את יוסף.
Yeah.
And that לא ידע את יוסף is the explanation of change of kingdom. Do you agree with this explanation?
Let me tell you something. I don't really care. The question, what really happened, is not a question that interests me. I don't have the Yetzer Hara to deal with this type of questions. I'm not interested in what really happened. I'm more interested in the way the stories are being told, why they are being told the way they are being told. What can we learn from the stories? What can we learn from the way the writers of the Bible wanted us to understand and to learn? Look, in the good old days, in the biblical times, and actually until the 19th century, when people wrote history, they did not care so much about, being accurate about the historical events. They used history in order to educate, in order to express their own point of view. So what really happened in Egypt, I don't know, and I'm afraid we'll never know. And actually, if you look into Egyptian literature, into Egyptian archaeology, you find no evidence at all to the existence of the Israelites there. So I don't know, they have been there, they haven't been there, how many of them have been there, etc. But I really don't care. Sometimes I tell my colleagues from the history department, I'm the real historian, because I understand why the stories or why the history is being told the way it's being told, not what really happened, something that we can never know until we invent a time machine. And so far, we haven't been very successful in creating it.
Thank you. So let's try to open the microphone. We have more questions. Arthur Elstein. Arthur, you can open your microphone.
Yeah, I want to thank you, Professor Yakovitch. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
We can hear
I want to thank you for your remarks, because I thought you made some connections between elements of the story that are very familiar to us, but that I hadn't seen that they're really connected. And I just wanted to thank you for your comments. I really didn't have a question. I just wanted to that the kiflan be'at from Yeshayahu, that's just an amazing midrash. And I just wanted to, I had never thought that Isaiah was referring to that count when he made that statement. I thought it was just a rhetorical flourish. And it turns out that it's quite a different thing, of course. And so thank you for that connection among the many that you made today. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. One more question from Mona Polacek. Mona? You can open the microphone, Mona. Okay, so we are going to Shalom Chikavsky.
Hello.
Hello. Yes, we can
Hello.
hear you.
Good evening, Emeritus. Thank you very much for that beautiful summary. We learned a lot, things we never thought about. But I have one question, is that I read in some books, I live in Geneva, and we have a lot of people coming and going away, rabbis and people like that from Israel. And they said that when you read carefully, you will find some writings, maybe not in the Torah, but in some midrashes, that the Jews or the Israelites in Egypt were not slaves. They were workers who were worked like slaves, but they were paid. Do you have any idea about this?
Look, it's not a matter of midrash, but already in the Bible itself, when the people leave Egypt, when they leave, they are quite rich. They take gold and silver and clothes, etc., etc. But also a Hebrew slave. If you read the law of the Hebrew slave in Deuteronomy chapter 16, you see that when a slave ends his service, his 6 years of service, and he goes free, he should get some wages from his master. And yet he is being referred to as a slave. So the Israelites in Egypt, they were slaves, but they made sure before they left to get paid for their enslavement. So that's already the concept within the Bible itself.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. We have now a question from the chat. I will read it for you. From Melanie Aaron. Would you agree that the story of the midwives makes more sense if they are Egyptian midwives for the Israelites? Otherwise, wouldn't Pharaoh have killed them? And also their use of stereotyping to convince Pharaoh.
Yeah, I think that I take the Septuagint and Josephus actually very seriously. And perhaps, again, the original text was that these midwives were Egyptians. And because they are also, as we read in the story, they are also the midwives of the Egyptian ladies. That's why they claim to know the difference between the the Israelite women and the Egyptian women. And perhaps the way the text was vocalized in the Hebrew Bible was done deliberately in order to present them as Israelites, because if you present them as Egyptians, it makes, again, the difference between Abraham and the Egyptian midwives. It presents them, the midwives, in a much more positive way than Abraham is being presented, and perhaps some people did not like the idea.
Okay, we have one more question from the chat from Pablo Libedinsky. How many years of the 430 were the Israelites actually slaves in Egypt?
There is a difference between the Midrash and the Hebrew Bible. According to the Hebrew Bible, it's very clear, both from Genesis 15 and also from from Exodus 12, that they were slaves for 400 according to Genesis, or 430 according to Exodus. It's the Midrash that came up with, I won't get into, that's very complicated mathematics, above my ability to deal with numbers, but it's the rabbis that claimed that the Israelites were enslaved only for 210 years. But that's not in the Bible. We have to know the difference, or to put a clear line between the biblical tradition and what the rabbis have done with it. So according to the Bible, yes, they were enslaved for 400 or for 430 years.
So we have time for maybe one more question. If you have, you can write it in the chat or raise your hand. Otherwise, Pamela, if you want, you have a question. So open your microphone.
Actually, this is a technical question. Yair, the first Nachmanides that you referenced, what verse is that from?
The first one?
Yeah.
It's on Nachmanides on chapter 12, Genesis chapter 12. I don't remember exactly. It's somewhere between verse 10 and verse 20, but in chapter 12. So it will be very easy for you to find it.
Thank you very much. All right, so we're done with the Q&As.
Yes,
okay, so I want to thank everyone for participating. I thought this was a fascinating discussion. Thank you so much, Professor Zakovitch. It's always a delight to hear you and to see you. Hopefully we'll see each other in person one of these days. And thank you everyone for tuning in. And I wish you all, before Pesach, it's a Chag Kasher Sameach, which I know is in a few weeks, but it's coming up sooner than we think. So thank you all, and have a wonderful rest of the day or evening, if you're wherever you are. Thank you.
Thank you a lot, Pamela.
Thank you very much.
Zakovitch, and thank you to all. And I will send to all of you the recording of this event in the next few days. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night. Bye-bye.